We are on Yud Tes Amud Beis. We are on page 19b. And the Gemara that we learned yesterday talked about we spoke about the,
Get out of here.
number one, the rows. Let me mute everyone. We spoke about the law of those that are doing the shura, doing the consoling the mourner after a funeral, and that they're exempt from the Shema. Which people are exempt if they're related, or if they're in the row that sees the mourner, sees the area where the mourner is, and or even if they're in a back row, but they came in order to honor the deceased or honor the mourner, to lenachem, to console the mourner. So they didn't come just to see what's going on. So we spoke about the exemption of reciting the Shema. Depending on how you learn the Gemara, there are different ways of understanding how far that exemption extends. And then the next Gemara started talking about the law of the mitzvahs. To what extent do we ever take into consideration something called kavod habriyos? Kavod habriyos means respect for humanity. And what that means is that, on the one hand, we know that Torah is absolute, and there's if the Torah says something, we obviously follow it 100%. But the question is there room for leniency in a case of serious situations? We obviously, life and death situations, we know that the Torah says you're obligated to transgress certain laws in a case of life and death. But what about cases that aren't life and death situations, but it's respect for humanity? Do we take that into consideration or not? And so the Gemara that we're learning here is emphasizing, ultimately it comes up with this idea that on biblical laws, we don't take that into consideration, but we do take it into consideration when it comes to rabbinic laws. And the Gemara, we'll start from the beginning again. And the first case that the Gemara talks about is a case of Kalayam, where a person realizes that his garment has shatnez, which is wool and linen, inside the garment. And as I mentioned in previous classes, it is common for suit jackets to sometimes have threads that are linen, even though it's a wool suit, and even though the manufacturer writes on the label that it's wool, it's 100% wool, it doesn't mean that it's 100% wool. There's often, they will find some linen threads in the shoulder pads or different, the collar, and therefore, especially sometimes the manufacturing place, they run out of certain material, they use other material, whatever it is. They don't consider it important, significant to write about it on the label. But the fact is that there are many suits that have shatnez, and that's why it's important for a person to have their... What is
the reason for not allowing wool and linen together? What is the reason?
The Torah says that that's one of the chukim, that is one of the statutes that we follow, even though we don't understand the law, the reason for it.
We don't know what.
We don't understand the reason for it. Obviously, even laws that we don't understand the reason for it, sometimes you can find different thoughts, different explanations that possibly, because of course it's a mitzvah to always dig deeper into the Torah and try to understand the depth of the Torah. But on the simple level, this is a law where we don't understand. It's called a chayk, a statute, and we don't understand.
Do you have any idea why that's like that, Rabbi?
What is that?
What is your idea why that's like that?
It's even if I had an idea, it wouldn't it wouldn't be worth sharing. It's
all right.
It's what they call in Yiddish a boich svara.
A what?
A boich svara. A boich means a stomach, and a svara means a thought. It means it's just a thought that came from my stomach. It means it's not valuable. That's a Yiddish term.
Don't say that. Don't put yourself down, Rabbi. Don't do that. I'm sorry.
I can't hear you. You're muted, Robert.
My thought is just, again, whatever you want to call it, it's the mixing of species, because you have something that is linen, which is grown, and wool from an animal. So it's a mixture of species. So that's my 2 cents.
You're definitely correct.
Kayin and
And-
Hevel. You have one is Kayin, the other one is Hevel.
Uh-huh.
And that's what combines the two. Since one is from cotton, grows from the ground, and linen comes from the animal. And therefore, it was a matter of mixing something, again, going back to Kayin and Hevel and mixing the two.
Mixing the different species.
Fascinating, fascinating.
So you're definitely correct that you're mixing species, and that's the idea of shatnez doesn't just apply to clothing. Mixing species we see often. We have milk and meat. We're not allowed to mix. We're not allowed to plow with 2 types of animals.
Wow.
And we're not allowed to grow Kalayam in the field. So you have this idea of, so Robert, you have a good point. But again, even with that explanation, it doesn't really explain why it's prohibited. It doesn't really
go to the root. It doesn't go to the root of it.
It doesn't really fully explain anything. It just meant you're just mentioning the sort of like what the law is, not really the reason for the law. So Avram,
Yeah, Rabbi, it was explained to me once that it goes back to Cain and Abel, is I believe Cain bought wool and Abel bought, and because the other round, linen. And there was such a problem over those sacrifices and everything that the rabbis decided to steer clear of them and not do anything to do with, wool and linen.
Well, I wouldn't say the rabbis, the Torah, because the wool and linen is prohibited in the Torah. But it is very interesting, what Isaac and Abraham both are mentioning very interestingly is that if you go back to the beginning of Genesis and the beginning of the Torah, you have the story of Cain and Abel, and Cain killed Abel. And the reason he killed him was because he was jealous. And what was he? Because God accepted the sacrifice of Abel and he didn't accept Cain's sacrifice. And what was Abel's sacrifice? Abel brought from the animals. That was like wool. And Cain brought from flax. So somehow the idea of that you see that this, I guess this the terrible outcome of this of these 2 sacrifices somehow is connected without that we don't mix the 2. So that's a very interesting thought. It's obviously more Kabbalistic, or you have to, you'll have to find it and look into the midrashic sources as well for such an idea. That's not the simple, it's obviously not the simple law, because, even that doesn't explain clearly why you can't wear a garment of the 2. But it's very interesting that that it goes back to there is a connection there. And thank you both for bringing that up. That's a very interesting point.
Fascinating.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So let's start with the Gemara. We are 4 lines from the top of the page. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Hamoitzi Kalayam bevigdoi. If a person finds Kalayam, and what this Kalayam in his clothing, Kalayam means this shatnez, this mixture of wool and linen. He finds this mixture in his clothing. Paishtan afilo bashuk, he has to take it off even in the marketplace. Now, I will mention to you that there is discussion among the commentaries. What happens if you find your friend has Kalayam, has shatnez in his garment? Very nice for you. You have to follow the Torah. But what about if your friend, he doesn't know? So if you know that you're wearing shatnez, so you are now obligated to take it off because you are aware of it. But your friend is not aware that they are wearing shatnez. And you go and you're walking by and you see he's got a certain suit that is actually rumor just came out that those suits all have shatnez, and you see he's wearing that suit. Are you obligated to tell him that he's wearing shatnez, that he should take it off? Or the fact that he is not aware of it maybe exempts you from telling him, because maybe it's less of a sin if he's not aware of it. In other words, a person who's aware of a sin obviously has to stop doing that sin. But if someone's not aware of a sin, would you be obligated to make them aware that they're totally not aware of that, the fact that they are wearing some shatnez? And would it be better to let them go home and then give them a phone call and tell them, would you be allowed to wait? Is there room for leniency when it's your friend wearing it who's not aware of the fact that they are wearing shatnez? And the truth of the matter is, commentaries mention that there were two versions in this Gemara. Our Gemara has the word bevigdoi. It says in his garment. But there is another version that doesn't say in his garment, it just says if you find Kalayam, it has to be taken off even in the marketplace. According to that version, it would imply that maybe even if your friend is wearing it, you would be obligated to tell him that he should take it off even in the marketplace. On the other hand, it seems that from the commentary, there is a discussion about this and there are different opinions. The question is how to understand the different opinions. It could be everyone agrees that you don't have to tell your friend about it. The only time that you would need to tell your friend to take it off is if he's aware that it's shatnez. So it could be even the opinion that says that you have to tell your friend to take it off. It could be that he's specifically talking about where your friend became aware of the fact that it's shatnez. In that case, you got to tell him you got to take it off immediately. But if he's not aware of the fact that it's shatnez, maybe there could be that everyone agrees you don't have to tell your friend about it, because he's only considered a shoygig, a person who's sinning inadvertently. He's not aware of this fact. And therefore, the fact that he'll go home and it'll be the same sin that he's wearing it now or wearing it for a few more minutes or until he gets home, and then he could take it off. And therefore, you would not be obligated to tell him. So it's a discussion in the commentaries. But basically, our Gemara mentions you found it on your garment, you would be obligated to remove your garment even in the marketplace. My taima, what is the reason? So
Rabbi,
says, yes.
I want to ask a question. How is that like not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind? If you turned around and your friend was eating his kosher bologna sandwich, and all of a sudden you realized it was not bologna, it was not kosher sandwich, you wouldn't wait. You would tell him right away. You don't want the person to sin, and you don't want the sin to affect his soul. So you would say to him, "Hey, that's you got the non-kosher sandwich. Stop eating." So, and then
Right.
It's not a question of just another few minutes, another couple of bites.
Right. It's good question. There are a number of differences. I'm not sure specifically the legality why. I have to look up to see the specifics, but there definitely are some differences. Number one, eating something that's not kosher, not only is it a sin, but it's also considered abominable, and it's disgusting. That's number one when it comes to food. But besides that, there probably a difference between the halachos. I'm not sure if possibly every moment that you're eating, every bite is considered a sin, and I'm not sure if that same law applies until you take a person who's not aware of the shatnez in their garment, if it's considered a sin every moment, or if it's the same sin that they're doing because it's the same they're still inadvertently wearing it. So because there's no chain, it's not like they became aware of it at some point to separate the inadvertent sin. So so it seems like there's definitely a difference, and I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like that might be the difference. But I'll try to look it up and see exactly what the commentaries explain. 1 second. Yehuda has a question. Yehuda.
I think that the difference could be that to stop eating the sandwich, you're not embarrassing him.
Right.
Whereas to take the bacon off, that could be embarrassing.
Right. The only thing is that we're saying that when it comes to biblical laws, we don't care about the embarrassment for humanity. So you know what I mean. So I don't know if that's if that is good enough. It may, it sounds good. It's a good point, but I'm not sure if it fully if it fully covers the issue. But anyway, definitely, I'll take a look and see. Maybe they mentioned something along those lines. Yehuda. Yes, Ben.
I
Ben?
think that's what I wanted to say, what Yehuda said,
Uh-huh.
but we are talking here not about yourself, we are talking about somebody else.
Uh-huh.
So somebody else is not going to be embarrassed by stopping eating, but he's going to be embarrassed by you telling him to take his clothes off.
Uh-huh. Well,
Oh my-
Yehuda, you got someone who's voting for you, but you know what? It's possible that it's brought down that way. I don't remember the specifics, so I can't. I have to look it up basically and see
I can,
exactly.
could I
why.
say something, Rabbi?
Yes. Yes.
Also, I think it's the way you tell a person that he's committing a sin, and if it's in front of a whole bunch of people, that's not right. I don't think that's acceptable. I don't think the Torah is going to single out a person to be embarrassed. But if you take them on the side and say, listen, Moshe, did you know what you're wearing?
Uh-huh.
Didn't want to tell you
Okay.
before.
Mhm.
And as far as the food is concerned, that could be a mistake.
Right.
I mean, I always look for the kosher mark, to be honest.
Uh-huh. Right.
If I can afford it, I buy it. If not, I ask God.
Don't tell us. Don't tell us what you do if not.
Okay,
But,
never mind.
But the thing is that obviously, you know, we want to do things as menschlich as possible, and Susan is emphasizing that it's important to try as much as possible not to embarrass them. At the same time, we don't want to allow more time to lapse while the person is sinning. So you take that into consideration as well. You know what I mean? The more you know, if you're going to wait 2 minutes till he's more comfortable, and then in the meantime, he's eating his cheeseburger.
Oh,
You know, but you're waiting 2 minutes because you think that you're going to make him less, less embarrassed. Not necessarily is that correct. I would think the opposite, that, you know, he would be more pained that you didn't tell him right away.
yeah.
Instead, you waited. Why did you wait 2 minutes? You should have told me 2 minutes ago when you walked by.
It's also, I believe it's also whether he can do anything about it is also a factor. If he's in a situation where, whatever.
Right. Obviously,
It's worth
Okay.
further research on
Yes.
circumstances.
In any event, the commentaries talk about this case of someone else wearing it. The Gemara that we are reading, the way the version that we have it is it's talking about yourself. You found that your garment has Kalayam shatnez, you take it off even in the marketplace. My taima, what is the reason? So we bring a verse from Mishlei, which is in Proverbs, Ein chochma vein tvuna vein eitza leneged Hashem. There is we don't take wisdom or understanding or ideas when it comes against a law, against the Torah, against Hashem. So none of these ideas are significant. Chochmah, wisdom, is not significant when it goes against Hashem's laws. Kol makam sheyesh chilul Hashem, any place where there is chilul, where there is a desecration of Hashem's name, ein cholkin kavod larav, we do not give honor to, we don't give honor to a rav, to a rabbi. So even if a rabbi is doing this sin, you don't think about the honor due to the rabbi. Instead, you think about Hashem and think about the fact that a sin is being done, and therefore you have to make sure to rid yourself of the sin. And what this means is that even if a rabbi would see himself wearing a garment in the marketplace, that shatnez, he shouldn't say, well, I'm a rabbi, this is below my dignity, that people have to honor me. Even the Torah says I should be honored. So for me, I don't have to take off this garment because I'm a big rabbi and people need to honor me, and this would be an embarrassment for what the Torah says to honor me, and therefore I could continue wearing it. The other guy has to take it off, but me, I need, the Torah says I'm supposed to get honored because I'm so scholarly and knowledgeable and righteous. And the Torah in here, the Gemara says, no, in cholkin kavod larav, we don't say that at all. And instead, it's all about Hashem's honor. And if this is prohibited, even a Rav would need to take off this garment in the marketplace. And then the Gemara continues, and it says, Mesve, they asked a contradiction, a question from a brisa. Kavru es hames v'chazru. When they buried the deceased and they returned, v'lefnehem beis drachim, and in front of them there are two paths to take. Achas tahira v'achas tamea. There is one path that's tahor, pure, and one path that is tameh, that is impure. Ba b'tahira, if the avel, the mourner, they're sort of letting the mourner call the shots. He's deciding which path to take. And if he decided to go in the tahar path, but in imai, they go with him. Ba b'tahira, in the pure one. Ba b'tameya, if the mourner goes in the tameh path, but in imai, the people who are escorting the mourner, they were at the funeral. Now they're heading back with the mourner. So the people that are going together with the mourner, they go with him b'tameya, in the impure. So if he took the impure path, they follow in the impure path. Mishum kavaydai, for his honor. They're honoring the mourner to walk with him. So the problem is, what happens if someone is a kohen? He's a kohen and he's traveling back with the mourner. And the thing is does he go together with the mourner? And obviously we're talking about a case. What is the mourner? What is the kohen doing in the first place at the funeral? So we must be talking about a case where the mourner, where the kohen was probably standing outside of the cemetery. And because he couldn't go in because of the funeral, because of the cemetery, he's not allowed to go in because he's a kohen. And but yet he can still walk with the mourner and comfort the mourner. So he's standing outside of the cemetery because a kohen is not allowed to go into the cemetery. But now when he's traveling back, he's going together with the mourner. And the problem is the mourner now took a path that is tameh, and the brisa here says you go along with the mourner, even though you're a kohen, you go with him. And that is what's surprising, that we take into consideration the fact that respect for humanity for the mourner, even though you're a kohen, you're not allowed to make yourself impure. So this is surprising to the Gemara. We thought you have to follow the law, even if it's going to cause some dishonor to another person, but to follow the law. And here it seems that we are showing that the law can bend a little in order for humanity to honor, respect humans. Yes, Yehuda.
So if that's the case, then why can't the Kohen go into the cemetery?
Right. That would be a good question to ask. In other words, if we're allowing him to.
So what do you say, folks? Should we begin?
Yeah, let me just mute some people here. Let me mute everyone. Okay, everyone's muted.
I just want to say that's a fantastic chapter.
Okay, I think that should make it better. So Yehuda's asked a good question. So if that's the case, why can't he go to actual funeral in the first place? That would also be covered up brios. So first of all, that could be part of the assumption that maybe it's allowed, or you could say that no, that going to the funeral is a different story, because here you're part of the group. You're doing something that's permissible, and now you're breaking away. You're leaving. Doing that act is an act of that's chutzpah. You don't walk out. You don't walk away from it. Here, in the first place, to go to the funeral, no, you don't have to go. You're a kohen. You're walking on the side. Here, you're walking together with the group, and now you're leaving the group. That's different than not going. You know what I mean? Not to go to the funeral in the first place. No one sees that. You're not. That you know what I mean. That you didn't go. But to leave when you're part, it's almost like walking out of a lecture. You walk out of the lecture, it's a little more embarrassing. Don't come in the first place. You know, I mean, I don't believe I'm fine. People can come late. People, if have to go, they can go. Don't worry. Don't take any. But the idea behind it, that you're in a lecture and someone leaves, it's more dishonor than if you than not to come in the first place and not to participate in a funeral. You agree, Yehuda? So that would be the thought. But in the conclusion of the Gemara, it's not a question, because in the conclusion of the Gemara, we're talking about a rabbinic law. We're not talking. We'll soon see that according to the conclusion of the Gemara, the question is a question. But I'm answering you based on the question part of the Gemara. How would how would the Gemara understand that, at least in its questioning? And the conclusion, you'll see it's not, the question isn't a strong question. But now it is. Now that we're doing the question of the Gemara, now the question deserves to have an answer. So that's why I'm answering based on the question. Okay.
One more thing. So if
Yeah.
somebody is so upset and they're trying to in the funeral, if they're so upset that they faint and you have to call the rescue, the funeral goes on or the funeral stops?
I'm not sure why you're asking that question.
I'm asking because you're saying that it's a horrible thing not to follow the mourners and to follow the procession, and you're not supposed to leave. And if it isn't, there has to be some leniency.
Well, obviously, life and death situations,
Is leniency, right?
It's
Even
not a
if
leniency, it's an obligation. And no person whose funeral is taking place wants someone else to faint and just be
Right.
stuck there until they finish. So it's not really a question at all. Obviously, we take life very serious.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's no question about that. But there are cases where we have to take. This is a very important question about Yiddishkeit in general. Do we bend the laws or not? Now, it doesn't apply. We're not talking about if someone faints and they need emergency help. We're not talking about that. But we are talking about a case where something's inconvenient or something's it's going to be a little not as comfortable to do in a case where you're following the Torah law. Is there any room for leniency? This is it's a very valid question. So the Gemara here says that it seems that the Kohen is allowed to break the law of purity or impurity. And Amai, why is this so? We're now at 10 lines down from the top of the page. Amai, why is it so? Lema, let us say, why is he allowed to break the law of becoming, of that he's not supposed to become impure? And we see he's breaking that law. We should say, Ein chochma vein tvuna l'neged Hashem, that wisdom and understanding, logic doesn't take consideration when it comes to transgressing a law of Hashem. That's what we should say. And therefore, we should not allow the mourner, we should not allow the Kohen to walk together with the mourner. So the Gemara answers, Tirgama Reb Abba. Reb Abba explains that the case is talking about not a regular case of becoming impure. We're talking about Beveis HaPras, Rabbanan, a rabbinic law of impurity, and the rabbinic law of impurity in a Beis HaPras. What is a Beis HaPras? A Beis HaPras, there are a few examples of it. The one here, Rashi brings down that we're talking about a field that is a grave was plowed, and they plowed through this field, and it turned out that there was a grave there, and so the entire field, according to Torah law, is really not considered tameh, because because it was plowed, it would not convey tumah. But rabbinically, we're afraid that a person might step on or move an etzem. There might be a bone that's the size of a barley corn, and if a person were to move that or carry such a bone, he would become impure rabbinically. And therefore, the rabbis therefore said that the rabbis said that you would not, a kohen is not allowed to walk in this Beis HaPras. So again, and this Beis HaPras is is really biblically not a problem to walk there, but rabbinically, it is an issue for a kohen to walk there. And therefore, because it's only a rabbinic law, therefore, in a case where it's kavod habriyos, where it's respect for another human being, respect for the mourner, we allow the kohen to walk and follow the procession with the mourner, and he doesn't have to go away from the group, and he walks together with them because it's rabbinic and rabbinic law. Basically, what the Gemara is saying is the rabbis didn't obligate their laws in a case where kavod habriyos is involved, where respect for humanity is involved. The rabbis did not obligate you to follow through with their specific laws. Yes, Ben. Ben?
This prohibition seems to me a little too stringent. I think the prohibition is a little too stringent. How does a bone come to be up on top? How deep did they bury the dead at that time, in those days?
That's a good point.
You know, I must
Did
say
you
the
hear me,
laws
or-
of purity and impurity are
Because-
complicated.
Good point.
Yeah.
I'm not
Because
sure.
if it's an animal that carried it, but the animal can carry it, the animal can carry it to any field, not particularly in the field where somebody was buried. Animals are known to carry bones, so they can carry it to any field.
So what you're asking is that maybe the grave was nothing happened to the grave because the plow just went on the top of it. That's what you're asking, right? That's your question?
The plow never goes too deep. The plow
Only goes-
never goes more than a foot, especially in those days, they didn't have tractors. They only had horses or bulls carry a plow. And they were not very deep.
Interesting.
That's a very interesting point.
Very.
I believe there's three tfachim, three hand breaths. So you're right. It's about a foot, a little less than a foot is how deep a plow goes. And for some reason, that's what we're concerned about. And for whatever reason,
Okay, I bring it up.
yeah. You know what? I have to. It's interesting to find out what the practical, how exactly the practical situation was in those days with regard to, this type of thing.
It's not from the Torah, and I think it's too stringent.
No. We can't say that you think it's too stringent, but you might want to try to understand what exactly is, you want to understand it better, the practicality of this,
Okay.
what the reason for the rabbinic laws.
Okay.
Your opinion that it's too strict is not,
Right.
it doesn't play any role. You could think all you want. The rabbis made these rules 1,000 years ago. They were smarter than me, you, and all the other people here, together, and they made these decisions. And they understood it. We're trying to
Right.
understand what their decree was, but in any
to
event,
find
the case
right
is
answer.
the case that we're talking about here is that it's a rabbinic law, and because it's rabbinic, a base hapras, this type of area where a kohen normally is not allowed to go, and possibly that's something along these lines is maybe that it is rare that it would have brought the bones that the bones would have been affected by this
If I could interrupt,
but
one thing is that the way the earth, a lot of times if the soil is not being held by the trees and the roots, and if the soil keeps blowing away, then the grave maybe
it become more revealed.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
That is, there's erosion. There's a natural erosion. I don't know how these people knew about that in that
Uh-huh.
time, but they must have.
Anyway, this is like scientific. We'll have to look into it and figure out, you know, what exactly the rabbis were thinking. I must tell you, just to preface this, the laws of Tumah and Tahara are not, you know, not so simple. And it's very hard to find rabbis that specialize in these areas as well. So it's some of the laws, and the reason is because we don't really apply them nowadays to too many rules, because we don't do truma, we don't eat truma, we don't the Kohens don't eat truma, they don't eat holy items, we don't go to the Beis Hamikdash. So because of that, the laws of Tumah and Tahara, the laws of purity and impurity, are not in any shape or form anywhere near as applicable as they used to be in the olden days. And therefore, it's hard to find, you know, it's very rare that people know these laws inside out. But definitely, we should try to understand the law of the Beis HaPras. But the Gemara here is mentioning that Beis HaPras is Drabanan, is rabbinic, and it brings two proofs. Damar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Well, the first proof is that Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel says, "Menapeach Adam Beis HaPras," a person can blow on this Beis HaPras, this area, this field, which is up to 100 amas, 100 cubits. He blows on this field, and as long as he blows away any of the dirt on the top, and he looks to see if there's any bones there, and
What?
that allows him to continue walking. So he can bend down, blow a little, and make sure there's no bones there, little pieces
Oh
of
my
bone.
God.
He can walk and continue walking. And the reason why he can do that is because we're not so worried that there is any bone there, and it's not a biblical law. It's a rabbinic law. Because of rabbinic law, it's good enough for him to do a little blow and to see, okay, it seems like it's fine. He blows a little more. He walks there. So we don't have to be as stringent as we would be if it was a biblical law. We are satisfied with a low level of checking. So that's what we're really doing here. We're you know, he's checking, but he's not doing a very serious investigation. It's good enough if he does this low level of checking where he blows the earth and he sees if there was a bone there, he would see it, and that's good enough. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Bar Ashi Mishmei Rav, and Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ashi says the name of Rav, Beis HaPras Shenidash, a Beis HaPras that people walked on. So if people walked on it, so that also would be considered tahor, pure, and basically we're not worried about any biblical tumah there, any biblical impurity, because if we were, we would not rely on the fact that people walked on it, that it would make sure that there's no bone that's the size of a barley corn. But the fact that we can rely on people walking there, that there's no bone that's the size of a barley corn, if they walked on it, that itself is a proof that we're only worried about a rabbinic law. And being that it's rabbinic, we can do a small type of we can rely on this, that it's good enough. We don't have to investigate more. So that's the point here, is that the rabbis did not obligate us to take the same extreme measures that we would take for a biblical law. The rabbi said, for our law, you don't have to go that far. It's good enough to check it out and do a semi-investigation, and that's good enough. It's good enough. You can rely on this. That's also good enough. People walked on it. It's good enough to rely on the fact that it's not a problem, and therefore, in our case, we're even allowing the kohen to walk on it in the first place because he's walking together with a mourner. We're allowing him to go on this area, and it's considered kavod to the avel. It's considered honor, respect to the mourner. And in a case of a rabbinic law, we take that into consideration. Yes, we take into consideration the respect for this avel, even though there is a rabbinic law that we should be concerned about. The rabbis didn't take it that far. Okay, so now the Gemara continues, and it says, Tashema, come and listen. I'm going to bring
Rabbi,
a proof, another
I wanted
proof. Yes.
I wanted to ask a question. I'm not noticing that it's saying a Kohen. So it seems to be understood that it's a Kohen, but
Right.
a non-Kohen also doesn't want to become Tameh if he's bringing korbanos to Yerushalayim. If he's bringing a korban to Yerushalayim, he also wants to be not Tameh. So I'm just wondering why it just specifies Kohen, even though it doesn't say Kohen.
Right. Well, certain things are automatic and obvious in the Gemara, and the Gemara doesn't have to spell it out. Talking about a non-kohen, he doesn't have a law. It might be his own, his own priority, that his own interest that he doesn't want to become tameh. But the law that about not becoming tameh doesn't apply to a, to a non-kohen. And here we're talking. So the obvious discussion is because there's a kohen in the, kohen around. So the answer to answer your question is that it's obvious that we're dealing with the kohen. And the fact that Israelites might also not want to become tameh, not a law against that. So that wouldn't be a reason for exemption, in these scenarios. Okay, so the next Gemara also it continues with this idea. Tashema, come in here. The Amar Rebbe Lazar Bar Tzaddik. Rebbe Lazar Bar Tzaddik says, "Medalgen hayinu al gabi aroinais shel mesim." We would jump over and on top of the coffins of the dead, likras malchei Yisrael, to go to see a king, a Jewish king. And now the Gemara doesn't say that Rebbe Lazar Bar Tzaddik is a kohen, David, but you have to. It's self-understood, and Rashi, of course, brings it out. Rashi mentions it that it's brought in Bechayris, but you have to understand that that's what he was saying. Otherwise, what's the big deal? Obviously, he's talking about that he's a kohen, and he used to go on top of the Aroinah Shel Mesim in order to reach. He would go on these graves in order to meet up with a king to honor the king. And not only a Jewish king, even to greet a Goyish king. If he merits, Yavchin, he will understand. He will realize the difference between Malchei Yisrael and Malchei Akum, between the kings of the Yidden and the kings of the Goyim. So in other words, it's important to go and see the difference between Jewish kings and non-Jewish kings. And so therefore, it's very important to go and greet them. Because if you greet them, you'll see their honor. And you'll see how a Jewish king is going to be honored in Olam Haba. And you'll be able to say, this is a whole different type of honor than a king would get in Olam Hazeh, in this world. And so therefore, there is a importance in jumping over the graves in order to be able to greet the kings. Now, what does this mean? He's a kohen. He's not allowed to be doing this. He's a kohen. He's not allowed to be doing this. And yet, he goes and does this. Rebbe Lazar Bar Tzaddik, he's doing this because it's considered honor. It's honoring for the king. He could have stayed home. But this is considered covered. It's a similar idea to covered habriyos. It's covered for the melech, that he's going to greet him. And even though he's a kohen. Now, how is he allowed to do that? So the Gemara asks, Amai, why is this? Lema, we should say, Ein chochma bein tvuna bein etza. There's no significance to wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and ideas that are contrary to the laws of Hashem, leneged Hashem. And so how could he go and transgress a law because he wants to give honor to a king, and he's transgressing a law? The Gemara answers, Kidda Rava, this goes like Rava said. The Amar Rava, Devar Torah Oyel Kol Sheyesh Bechalal Tefach, that Rava said another law about Tumah, and again, we're getting into these laws, these complicated laws of Tumah, but the law is, Tumah means impurity. The law is that according to the Torah law, an oyhel, a tent, Kol Sheyesh Bechalal Tefach, if it has a space of a handbreadth, Chaytzetz B'fnei HaTumah, it actually separates between the Tumah, the impurity. If it doesn't have a space of a tefach, handbreadth, so then it doesn't separate before the Tumah. What does this mean? That if a person is buried in a coffin and there's an empty space, a cubic handbreadth of space above it, above the deceased, and the top of the coffin. So if there's that empty space, so the law is that the space and the wall, the covering ends up blocking the impurity, which would mean that if you were to walk on top of the coffin, you would not become tameh. Why are you not tameh? Because the tumah, the impurity, ends right by the top of the coffin.
So
the
that's
impurity, yeah.
So that's how you can put a coffin in the cargo space of an airplane and have the people sitting above it.
Possibly. Again, these are complicated laws, and just because we're reading one law here, it doesn't cover everything. I'll give you an example. There are other laws of the coffin itself could cause impurity that also has to be dealt with, because a coffin could create impurity, and something Tosfos deals with over here on the top Tosfos. So there's numerous laws, but you're right. You have an interesting point there. I was once told that a lot of kohanim do not travel on El Al because El Al, carries very often. They carry coffins to Israel, and so I'm not 100% sure if that's correct. But I was once told that a lot of that kohanim often don't travel on El Al to go on other airlines because other airlines don't normally carry coffins to Israel. But
could I ask you a question, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Is there a material that is not allowed a coffin to be made out of?
Yeah. So a coffin can't be made out of metal. It has to be something that naturally decomposes. Wood. Okay. It's supposed to be made out of wood, and it's supposed to be made out of the simplest wood because we're not supposed to embarrass those that can't afford it. So it's generally the cheapest, the simplest wood. So
thank you.
So the Gemara here says that if there's a empty space of a tefach, it actually blocks the tumah, and if it doesn't have an empty space of a tefach, then it doesn't block the tumah. Now, the majority of these coffins, they do have an empty space of a tefach, and therefore, normally a kohen would be allowed to walk over a coffin because the impurity that's below them is blocked once the cover of the coffin is on top. Once the cover of the coffin blocks the tumah, and that should block the tumah. It shouldn't be any problem. Now,
Rabbi,
just one second. Let me just finish the last line. So, the gozru al sheyesh bahen mishum she'ein bahen. and they made a decree on those that have a empty space, a cubic handbreadth, because of those that don't have a cubic handbreadth. So the thing is that really walking on top of a coffin should be allowed. And even though there are some coffins that don't have that empty space, the rabbis decreed that even though most coffins do have the empty space, let me reword that. Even though most coffins do have the empty space, the rabbis decreed rabbinically you're not allowed to. Rabbinically it's impure, all coffins, because there's some that don't have that empty space. What does that mean? Someone was much bigger and the coffin is small, so there's no empty space in it. So that's rare. But the rabbis decreed that even cases where there is the empty space, we should consider all the cases as if it doesn't have the space, and therefore a kohen should never go on top of a coffin. However, mishum kavod malachim legazru barabanan. But in this situation, where it's to honor the king, the rabbis did not establish their law, and therefore a person would be allowed to go on top of a coffin in order for this purpose, because it's only a rabbinic law, and a rabbinic law, the rabbis didn't establish their laws in this type of scenario. And that means that the rabbis, we're not bending the law. It's the rabbis never decreed the law in this type of case. I think Moshe had a question. Moshe, was that
Yes.
you? Yeah.
Okay, you're talking about you can't step on the coffin at the Levaya in a cemetery, you're saying. Is that correct? The Kohen cannot step on the grave. I mean, they can't step on the coffin at the cemetery.
Well, what it seems like, I'm not sure if the Gemara means it literally, they would step on the actual coffin, or does it mean they would step above the area where the coffin is situated? How does does anyone have an English open in front of them? Does it imply that the person is actually walking on top of the coffins, or is it more like on the place where the coffin is, meaning like through a cemetery, or they're walking above where the coffins are buried?
It says in the Steinsaltz that he would jump over the coffins of the deceased.
Right.
He would jump over.
And so, okay, so jump over. They didn't step on the actual coffin; they would jump over it, but they're considered a ohel, like a tent over it. So they
This
would
is
jump
showing
over the coffin.
kapsut to the melech, But the other thing is to take into account the trees. They carry tuma? I mean, themselves. I mean.
Oh, you're talking about if there's a tree above it, that it would be an
tree above
ohel.
it, yeah, right.
Yeah. So that tree only will carry impurity if the impurity shoots up above the coffin. If the impurity is limited to the coffin, it would not. The tree would have no issue. You get what I'm saying? The tree would only be a problem if the coffin is not blocking the tumah. If the coffin doesn't block the impurity, then the impurity travels above the coffin, and it travels all the way up to a tree, and the tree would end up being a tent that would encompass that coffin and make anything under the tree impure. However, here we're not dealing. Number one, we don't know if there are trees, but even if there are trees, it's not a problem, because we're dealing with the fact that most coffins don't even allow any impurity to go above the coffin. The impurity stays within the coffin.
I see.
Yes, Mel. I can't hear you. You're muted. You're still muted. You're still muted, Mel. Mel, you're muted. Mel.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yeah, until Mel realizes that. Mel, you're muted, Mel. Okay, he doesn't hear me. I don't know. Okay, yes.
The thing is, it seems like there's so many
Rabbi,
laws that are sort of, I won't say erasing, but eliminating the need to not walk in these certain areas, that it's almost like maybe, I mean, it seems like there should be some kind of a clause that permits the Kohanim to walk through the cemetery, because almost all coffins, if not all, have that tefach of space stopping the impurity. And, you know, we were taught, of course, about the trees, for example. But
I don't understand what you're saying, Phyllis. Start from the beginning. What is the purpose of what you're saying? You're asking a question, or you're explaining something?
My purpose is, if there's so many ways in which eliminate the concern, or if they don't eliminate the concern, but they obviate the need to avoid walking through the cemetery for the Kohen, I don't see why they don't make some kind of general law that permits it, because, as I say, we were always taught about the trees. You're not supposed to walk under the trees. If you're a Kohen, you can't even go into the cemetery. And yet it seems like there's so many exceptions based upon this fact that the coffin itself has a tefach of space stopping the tama, that it wouldn't be tabe enough that it would prevent the Kohen from walking through the cemetery and giving kavod to the mace.
Right. So you're asking a question of, okay, fine, Phyllis. So Phyllis, so basically you're asking why do we seem so strict with the, if it seems like there's very little impurity? That's what your question is.
Yeah, basically,
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, fine. So that's what you're asking, and the answer is that it's not. It's actually the opposite. That the rabbis decreed the impurity to all coffins. So rabbinically, even if you were to say, even if we assume, as the Gemara says, that majority of coffins don't have this issue, but there are some coffins that will have this issue. The rabbis decreed all coffins to have this issue, and therefore rabbinically, we do have to be strict for all the cemeteries. The only thing that surprises you is you thought it was always biblical that we were so strict, and the answer is that maybe it's more rabbinic. Now, so I think that's maybe the difference. I will just mention something to you. I'm not sure how this works exactly. With regard to a cemetery. In other words, if we're understanding the Gemara to mean that they used to walk on or jump over the coffins,
Rabbi,
it sounds like we're dealing
not
with
jumping over the coffins.
Okay.
Rabbi, it says they are jumping on the coffins, not over the coffins. On gabei, al gabei, aronot, not me'al aronot.
Okay.
Okay.
How does the art scroll? Does anyone have an art scroll open?
It says we would clamber over the coffins of dead.
Could anyone translate clamber? What is clamber? Jump?
It's certainly not jumping.
Clamber is
using your hands as well.
It's jumping
It's not
from one
jumping.
to the other.
Climbing, like climbing.
That's right. It's
Yeah.
more like climbing.
Yeah.
They are on
It's
top of
climbing
the coffins.
over.
They are not over the coffins.
Uh-huh. So according to that, it sounds like they're actually stepping on the
Not in
actual
Hebrew.
coffin.
Mine says leap over.
Uh-huh. Leap, is that the Koran Talmud? What do you have, Ruvain?
I have the
Traditional
Arts-
press.
I have the art scroll.
Have
and it's
traditional press.
Trampled upon.
Trample on.
Upon. Yeah,
Upon.
trampled
Uh-huh.
upon means on. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So according to this,
What I'm saying.
it sounds like we're talking about not a cemetery, but he would pass through an area
No.
where they were before the burial, where they would have the coffins before they were actually buried. That's what it sounds
Right.
like. Is that? Do you agree with that? Does everyone seem like that's what the understanding is? It doesn't sound like a cemetery.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That's what it seems like.
On the
So we're
coffin,
not
yeah.
dealing with a cemetery. We're dealing with he would trample upon the coffins. So maybe it was like before the funerals, they would have, you know, a number of coffins that were not buried yet, whatever they were waiting for, and maybe that day they would be buried and so on. And therefore they would he would pass through that area. He would climb on them to get to the place where the king was going to be revealing himself. So the thing is, how does this apply to a cemetery? Now, all I know is that in the cemeteries here in Florida, there is a charge that they will charge, which is to fill in the grave. Because what happens is the coffin initially is a box that is holding up a lot of weight on top of the coffin and all that earth and rocks that are on top of the coffin. What happens after a few days is it actually falls in, because so whatever space was there before the burial, it actually breaks that space afterwards, and there's no more space. So according to that, biblically, the tumah, the impurity, would still be there. In other words, to climb on top of a coffin, maybe it's only rabbinic, because majority of coffins have space, and it's only rabbinic that it would be prohibited. But in a cemetery, it would seem that there is no space, and if there is no space, then that would be biblical impurity that just continues traveling. So the only exception is some of the cemeteries here have liners. Now the liner is a different story. A liner is made of cement. The liner, that might block the weight of the earth, and therefore it would not break the coffin, and would end up possibly being a leniency, I guess, maybe, that it wouldn't, that maybe this type of a cemetery might be a more rabbinic prohibition than a biblical prohibition, because maybe there is a space. Again, I'd have to speak to rabbis that specialize in the laws of purity and impurity to find out what they would say about this. But this is interesting, thought. Again, the cemeteries that don't obligate you to have a liner, those cemeteries, I think, would be more biblical prohibited, because I don't think there would be any space from the, that would separate the deceased from the coffin, because after a few days it falls in. And those cemeteries charge like a filling fee, that after the funeral they refill. The other funerals charge a liner fee, but they don't have to fill it in afterwards. And that the liner maybe would be more of a rabbinic issue than a biblical issue. Anyway, it would be interesting to find someone who maybe specializes in these laws, and we could ask them. Okay, my time is up. Sorry for taking so much of your time.